We continue the conversation with Rob Bradford, Red Sox writer from WEEI, talking a little bit about how he thinks the game has changed, some of his favorite moments that he's covered, and much, much more. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Red Sox, your daily Boston Red Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I want to welcome you back into Locked On Red Sox podcast, and thank you so much for making Locked On Red Sox your first listen of every single day. I'm your host, Massachusetts Pirates team insider Jake Ignaszewski, and we're back again talking with Red Sox writer from WEEI, Rob Bradford. We talk a little bit more about some of his favorite moments that he's covered, players that he's interviewed, and also how he's seen the game change throughout his years working in baseball. Let's get back into our conversation with Rob Bradford.
I remember, I mean, I don't know where you were for that Evaldi game, the Dodgers Red Sox World Series game, but it was like that was the weird thing about that was, Evaldi, unbelievable effort by him, get the standing ovation after and everything else. There was no chance that the Red Sox were ever scoring. Like if you go back and look at their lineup, what it had become at that point, like nobody was getting a hit. It was it isn't happening. And by the way, 800 Dodger dogs. The guy in the back of the press box told me that later. It's like they basically dished out 800 Dodger dogs to the media, just to the media in that game. Yeah, that's not good. Not good. That's why sports writers look like they do.
I mean, we see Cotillo all the time talking about the ice cream at Fenway.
Don't get me going, man. He's like he's I don't know. He's still he doesn't even realize that he has the metabolism now, whatever, 26, 27. He has a metabolism. Is that try doing if I had one thing like he does of ice cream, forget about it. I'm done. Yeah, and that's another challenge. That's another thing. Here's pro tip for starting out in press boxes. They give you waves of food and waves of drinks and waves of ice cream, and you got to resist. Don't do it. Don't do it.
The Woo Sox give a really good spread. They give out cupcakes and stuff, and I'm just like, give it to me.
But young man, come on. It's you can do that. I can do it. It's metabolism. It's great, but it's it's just different. It's just different. So I'll we'll see about Cotillo's ice cream consumption 3 years from now. Get back.
Yeah, we'll see. But I mean, you mentioned you talked to a lot of different players throughout your career, and is there any player in particular or moment from an interview that sticks out in your mind at all?
No. I mean, I will always have fun with Pedroia. I mean, we always had. It's funny because I talked to him about this. Is that we sort of came up together a little bit where, he's obviously a little bit younger than I am, but at the same time, I really didn't start covering the Red Sox full time, certainly traveling until really I was at the Herald. That was 2007. Mm-hmm. So, and so Pedroia gets called up in 2006. So we get along, but it was always I remember people saying, are those two serious? Yelling back and forth in the clubhouse, we were, talking trash to each other. And I mean, but that was for Pedroia. That was he was constantly talking trash to people, and we would do it, and then we would have serious stuff going on, and but there was that's the thing is that you just can't. How it was when Pedroia was doing it, and he had to change. He did change as his career went on. The clubhouse isn't the same anymore. It's not. Right. It's too much social media. You don't know what people are going to do. Some all it takes is one person to tweet out something that you're yelling, take it out of context. I mean, they're much more guarded now, much more guarded. So, to answer your question, there's a long list of them. But Pedroia was he was one of a kind. He was one of a kind when it came to interviews, and and so I did some good stories with him. I had some good moments with him, and there's a lot of guys. I mean, there's a lot of guys who I remember doing memorable stories. I mean, one of the stories that I'll never forget it was crazy. Was two. No, number one, when JD Drew got signed, it was like somebody told me that he used all this wacky stuff to prepare, like the stuff from cosmonauts and hyperbaric chambers, which I guess isn't that wacky anymore. But he would put like things, radiation things all over his house and on his phone. And so I was at the Eagle Tribune at the time, and I got a chance, and this was before he was even playing for the Red Sox. He just signed. And so I did this story about like this whack. I mean, it was like this guy, Eagle Tribune. It was like, oh my God, I fell into this story. It was unbelievable because everyone was talking about who is JD Drew.
Mm-hmm.
And I stumbled upon this, like this guy is using all this stuff. And again, great guy, got to know him. And, but that is from working a suburban paper. That's tough to do. You don't have the access of some of these other places, of certainly the bigger papers at the time. Another one was Jason Bay. You remember Jason Bay?
Yeah, I remember Jason Bay.
Right, yeah. And so he, after the year, he ends up signing with the Mets. But what happened was in July, he was all set to sign with the Red Sox in a 4-year deal, and they had the press conference ready to go. And then out of nowhere, the Red Sox said, sorry, we're tearing up this deal. We want to make it a 2-year deal, and you're going to have knee surgery. He's like, there's nothing wrong with my knee. And they, out of the blue, had come up with this knee thing, tore up his deal. Obviously, doesn't work out. Really hurts his market. He got a little bit lucky because the Mets end up signing to a deal later on. But, that was bizarre. That was bizarre. And
I never heard of that. That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it was really nuts. I mean, it was like, because we didn't know, obviously, during the season. I found out all this after the season, and they just out of the blue. I mean, they just like, you have this knee thing. So my knee doesn't even hurt, and he never had a problem with his knee ever, like from going forward. But he had a 4-year deal with the Red Sox, all set to go. Which obviously, I think he was a really good Fenway player. I think he would have been really good for the Red Sox. But
I agree.
There
he had that nice little pull swing as well, and
man, good enough fielder. Yeah,
him and Adam LaRoche, they're like 2-second Red Sox careers. But you brought up Pedroia. He was my all-time favorite player all throughout my childhood. I got a bobblehead of him right here with all of his achievements and all that sort of stuff. But I grew up being told I was too small throughout playing baseball, and so I would always just think of Dustin Pedroia and his greediness.
Yeah, well, that's like you were talking with Coop when he was on the podcast, right? He's like, Coop. We paid Coop in T-shirts, smiles, and an interview with Pedroia. So he come to there very special that day. We did that podcast, but he was and I'm glad he got a chance to talk to him, much like you're talking about, where I think Pedroia means a lot to a lot of people, like in that era, the way that he approached the game. And I can tell you all kinds of story about it. I mean, one of them is I think it was in 2012, he had broke like his hand, and he ends up playing in these meaningless games in New York. And at the end of the year, he just says, I say, hey, text him. I say, hey, good job. He's like, yeah, it's something I can show my kids and be really proud of him, which it wasn't like Pedroia. Pedroia would always be sort of like, a wacky, witty or whatever, but he was like really serious about it. And I think it's funny because and I don't know if like people's passwords for I'm not giving away anybody's password. I don't know what your ATM password is or whatever, but I find it so interesting that people's passwords usually end with an iconic player when they're growing up. And so I'm not going to say who it was for me because it would give away my passwords, but it was like, and I found out that a lot of people had the same guy. And then I hear a lot of people have 15 at the end of their passwords. and so you're nodding your head like, yes, yeah.
Mine was 02. That was one of my original ones for Ellsbury. And then obviously
really?
when he went to New York, he broke my heart. So
Yeah.
Pedroia
But
was just my
yeah,
man.
so you get the idea though. I mean,
Yeah.
so yeah, and so that obviously meant a lot. So yeah, he's and the Machado thing is undeniable, right? I mean, Machado thing is, and the problem. My problem with that is that Pedroia absolutely thinks like he should that Machado
Mhm.
based his career. And what happens? Whatever. I think it was an ill-advised play, but it happens. The problem I have is that Machado's never reached out to him. Like
Yeah.
never said. I mean, and that's all it takes, man. Maybe he hangs up on him. I don't know, but I think that would be the right thing to do. But whatever. That's a long time.
I hope you are enjoying my conversation with Rob Bradford, but I just want to take a second to talk to you about BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for your football betting information this season. You can find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles on every game that you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, golf, and boxing. So head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. Now let's get back into my conversation with Rob. Yeah, Machado, I'll never forget his little thing with Josh Donaldson. I don't know if you remember when he let go of his bat and he tried to have it hit Donaldson at third base, and it was literally because
Oh,
Donaldson just tagged him and he fell over or whatever. But interestingly enough, Justin Verlander, he was talking. There's these kids on TikTok and they have media credentials and they asked like get to know you questions or different questions to players. And Verlander said that he misses that rule. He wished that they took out that rule of the impact at second base. He said, I really liked seeing, shortstops or second baseman jumping up and all that sort of stuff. But you obviously saw what happened to Chase Utley at the end of his career and, all these different instances where it happened.
And now they don't come. I mean, you watch it now. I mean, they don't come close. I mean, they don't come close to it. And it's like that's just totally gone from the game. You go back to remember like that started the whole Joe Kelly Tyler Austin fight. It was Brock Holt, right? Austin slid into Brock Holt. So yeah, so too bad.
But how interesting has it been for you to see the game evolve over the time of you working in it?
I think that it's not so much the game evolving as it is, from our perspective, how it evolves in the media and how players have changed, how the approach has changed. Obviously, the media is a whole nother ball of wax, how that has changed. That's trade changed unbelievably. So in terms of the game, I think that, the biggest thing, in short, it's like, okay, you have new rules, you have to enforce them because every time you have new rules, you enforce them for a little while, then they go away. I mean, hitters aren't supposed to take both feet out of the batter's box. That's a rule, happens all the time. Gone. I mean, they still enforce it. But it's, I think that, so just enforce the rules. And I think the new rules are good. But I think that the biggest thing is just, the players are more protective. They want to get things out on their terms on Instagram a lot of times. Not all the time. I mean, so I think breaking news has been totally devalued. Yeah. Okay, someone breaks a story, great. Everyone gets some attaboys, but then you move on. 50 people confirm it, and then you're moving on. And obviously, like much like yourself. I mean, and I do it every day too. I mean, you're trying to stay ahead of the curve when it comes to the media in terms of what people want, what employers want. That never changed, and that hasn't changed. That everything is. I always find it fascinating how like a journalism class, if someone is being taught a journalism class by someone who had been a teacher for 10 years, like holy girl, like in last 2 years, it's changed so much. So yeah, so I mean, I think that to me, that's the bigger thing is that how covering baseball has changed.
I mean, you could even look at the analytics and betting as well. That's something that
Yeah.
I've really tried to learn is some of the analytics. But I just started making betting videos and having to not allow your emotions to go into that sort of stuff. But
Well, good move, because that's where the money is, and that's where we talk about what employers. This is entirely probably a whole nother podcast, but it's what employers are looking for, what they're valuing. And betting is one of the things. I mean, because that's where the money is, and so it's that there's that. And you bring up an interesting thing with analytics. That's a tricky one, because I know that everybody wants to like I saw the Carlos Correa clip the other day when he was on what was it, TBS. And he was great, right? He was great. And he's talking about how batting average, RBIs, and home runs out the door, and the WOBA, and whatever else are what's being considered. That's fine. That's great. And I find that really interesting. And we should all try to figure this out. But the challenge is presenting it, right? I mean, the first step was OPS, believe it or not. Like putting OPS up on the scoreboard was a big deal. And a lot of people are like, OPS, what's that? Well, that's easily explained, right? That's easily explained what OPS is. Right. This other stuff, like I was looking up WOBA today, just to sort of like, I really, really want to dig in on all this stuff. And it's plus this, plus this, plus this, plus this, plus this. And so why people can put it in a story or a tweet or whatever it is, and you'll get the attaboy from everybody else. You have to play to your audience. You have to deliver. It's just like the major leagues. One of the challenges is, and Joe Madden talked about this on our podcast, is that you have to be able to deliver it to the players so they understand it. Right. You have to deliver it to your listeners so they understand it. It's all good and well that you know about this stuff. That's fine. But are people going to tune out? Yeah. And maybe in 3 years, it's not much like OPS. It's not even a conversation. But I think that's something that I don't think enough people who are delivering this information, the media, are taking into account. Like you have it's like the Billy Madison, talk to me like I'm a second grader. Yeah. That's it. So anyway, that's changed.
And some people out there in Red Sox Twitter, like Tyler Milliken and also on the Carabas Pod, does a great job of explaining all that stuff and incorporating into his analysis. But that's something that I think sometimes when he spews out these stats, I'm like, all right, let me go and look this up and see what he actually means. But I mean, especially for you as well, with podcasting, social media, and you even mentioned it too. People like myself, other people are trying to break in the industry. When you break a story or you break, somebody signing, it's really easy for people just to copy and paste and just do that. They don't have to tag you.
No, I mean that could be frustrating, man. I'm not gonna lie to you. Yeah. There's a couple Twitter accounts out there, and it's like, hey, this happened. Well, how did that happen? How did you find that out? And there's no repercussions. There's nothing you can do. You can be the person who's like, hey, give me credit, but do you really want to be that person? I mean, I don't know. It's still like this race. It's like this. It's funny because I remember not too long ago, it was when people would tweet, like, if you had a story that you were breaking, you would still try to attach a story to it, to the tweet, right? Because what good does it do your company if people aren't going to the story? Right. But ultimately what happened was you couldn't do that anymore. And it happened to me. I can't remember exactly which, it might have been like a Napoli thing or something. But I had a story, and I spent, I'll write 3 paragraphs about it. But in that time I was writing 3 paragraphs, someone else tweeted about it, and it was gone. That scoop was gone. So if you find something else now, you're tweeting it. That's it. Yeah. And that's changed too. And yeah, so anyway, I think that another great thing about baseball and covering baseball, and we've touched on it here, I think, that it doesn't have to be. You don't have to be like you have to do this.
Mm,
Like we can tell stories. We can goof around. We can talk about gambling. We can talk about
exactly.
analytics. We can talk about breaking. We can break stories. We can talk about news. Whatever. It's like we can talk about any of this. You can find your niche, and that's fine. I mean, no,
Mm,
we are well past having to cover every little thing. Like
exactly.
that is come and gone. Just pick the most important thing. Pick the thing that interests you the most. Be passionate about it. Boom, you're on your way.
Couldn't agree more. And you talk about interesting things. I didn't know until today that you were a third cousin of Carlton Fisk.
Oh man, look at you down the dark web.
I
uh,
also know about the relative that invented the electronic television too. I do my
oh,
research.
yeah, yeah, well, yeah. Don't search too much. uh, but no, that what got me through Little League. My dad told me that, so I just assume it's true.
That's
So
funny.
yeah, third cousin of Carlton Fisk, a relative of Governor William Bradford, Pilgrim. That got
Wow.
me a street credit at Thanksgiving, and
We
then
might be related. I'm related to Miles Standish and John
oh, there
Alden.
we go. Yeah, yeah. So I find there's a few. John Ryder used to work with us. He was supposedly related to Governor William Bradford too. So I mean, look, whatever, man. It much to do with Miles Standish. When you're in first grade and you can whip that out, that is a
Oh,
lot of.
cool.
And so and then my middle name is Farnsworth. So Philo Farnsworth is the
Mhm.
guy who invented the tube for the TV. Which, by the way, I've always said this. I'm like, I would be making so much more money and be thought of with more esteem if I just bit the bullet and just like have my pen name be R. Farnsworth Bradford.
Right.
Doesn't I mean, I'd be working for the New York Times right now.
Yep.
But I couldn't imagine. Listen, I can't imagine someone yelling at me saying, "Hey, Aaron Farnsworth, you suck." I rather say, "Hey, Bradfo, you suck." It's better. Doesn't fit on the T-shirt quite as much.
And then also, if you ever get like a TV gig, you can be like, "I'm the reason why this even exists," or
Well,
my
yeah,
my relative is,
I say that on Nesson pregame all the time. It's on, so it's all good. It's all good. Come and gone.
That's funny.
So,
One last thing for you, especially with the postseason really starting to heat up. I'm curious, who's your World Series prediction?
oh man, I tell you who I want. I mean, I want Cleveland against Philadelphia.
Yeah,
I really
that'd be
want.
fun.
Yeah, I mean the Dombrowski dynamic, the Schwarber, obviously. I
Hmm.
just like the passion of the Phillies. I still like, I like some of the guys in the Padres, some of the guys I don't like in the Padres, and really, like honestly. So I grew up, Iggy, like I grew up a Red Sox fan. I might probably say this to your class all those years ago, but I grew up a Red Sox fan. But now it's more you root for time of game, you root for lines,
Yeah.
you root for human beings. I mean, that's what it is. So, if there's a player that I like, or a manager that I like, or a GM that I like, I'm probably going to be rooting for them. But like Tito, like how can you not? I really would love to see Francona just manage his ass off once again in the World Series. I mean, you go back to that World Series against the Cubs. He was just what a run he had. I mean, Cora had a great run in 2018, right? Francona, same thing. Sometimes you see these guys and they just get in the zone. Every move they're making is great. Like I would love to see that. And by the way, like nobody would really know this without really, really knowing the rosters and everything else. But Francona's coaching staff, it's all his guys, man. It's
Yeah.
all guys who used to be with the Red Sox.
Hmm.
DeMarlo Hale, Carl Willis, Victor Rodriguez. Like this isn't like, hey, we brought in a bunch of young analytical guys, and they do have some of those guys, but these
Hmm.
guys are old guard. So yeah, so that's I don't know. I don't know if I would pick, but that's what I want to see.
Yeah, especially with the Guardians. I think it was like 14 rookies this season. That's incredible.
Yeah, right. And it's an exciting team.
Yeah.
Right. It's a fun team. It's an exciting team. I like Seattle a lot for the same reasons.
Yeah.
Like I said, I don't know if you agree, but I said all year long, I said if I was going to start a team, if you could start a team with one guy, I would start with Julio Rodriguez, and that's obvious, factoring like the age and everything else. And people say, oh, well, Juan Soto or whoever, all good arguments. But to me, like, I'm starting with Julio Rodriguez.
Yeah, his energy, and it seems like he plays so mature too for his age. It was kind of cool at the Fisher Cats. I had the opportunity to meet Jerry DiPoto when he was the special assistant for the Red Sox with Dombrowski. And I saw him behind home plate. He was obvious. It was obviously when the Sea Dogs were in. And I'm like, he drafted, Mike Trout. He signed Albert Pujols, and it's pretty remarkable what he's been able to do with that Mariners.
Yeah, you forget that there was a time where the Red Sox hired him to basically like scour the minor league systems.
Yeah,
like between jobs, like that was his job. Hey, basically give us your report on how much we suck in the minor leagues or how much how great we are. So yeah.
And then he made like 250 trades with the Mariners right when he got
crazy. I know, including, by the way, with one right out of the gate with, I think with Dombrowski, was the Wade Miley. Who was in that? Who was in that trade? Wade Miley. They got someone else. Yeah, I know they made the Tyler Thornburg trade with the Brewers, but the Wade Miley trade with the Mariners, and that was like right out of the chute. Like, oh man, yeah, you just scouted these guys. Of course, you just made a trade.
Exactly. That's so funny. Well, Rob, really appreciate you taking the time today. For anybody who wants to, go and support the Bradfo Show or support anything that you're doing, where can they check that stuff out? And also shout out your book as well that's coming.
Yeah, man. Thanks. Well, first of all, we're all part of the Odyssey family. Yeah, I mean, your podcast is on the Odyssey Network, and we really appreciate it. So, most importantly, go to your podcast. I mean, we're Bradfo Show is an Odyssey 24-hour in sports podcast. You can get it on all the Spotify, iTunes, all the above. Much like yourself, we try to crank these out throughout the off season as much as you can. I think there's an appetite for it, so we'll continue to do that. The book is coming out March 14th. I did it with Joe Kelly. And it's called A Damn Near Perfect Game, Reclaiming America's Pastime. And basically it's Joe just ranting and raving about what's good and bad in baseball, and why interviewing people like Rob Lowe and Mark Hoppus of Blink-182 and players. And so it was a lot of fun to do. So that'll be out on March 14th. And that obviously the whole Baseball Isn't Boring campaign, which Coop is a big part of at BB Isn't Boring, that was born from the book, and as I think Coop talked about a little bit, and so we have huge things going on with Baseball Isn't Boring, coming up very, very soon, actually in the next 2 weeks, through Odyssey. Yeah, it's going to be professionally for me, it's going to be a big, big deal, and so that'll be coming out in the next couple of weeks. So all good. And I'll get you a t-shirt, most importantly.
I appreciate I was actually looking I saw Coop post on Twitter. I'm like, I need one of those. Because I also see Emerson Latzia wearing it all the time too. I'm good friends with him.
Yeah. Well, listen, he just likes it because it shows off his triceps. But it's like, well, you're at the top of the list. We'll get you one this week, no question about it. It's been a lot of fun. It's a long story how we sort of started it. It has to do with the book, but once we started the Baseball Isn't Boring campaign, what we realized that there was so much meat on that bone. Like there was so much, people loved that dynamic. I brought those t-shirts down the Red Sox. Next thing you know, like 8 guys are wearing them every day. And the message is who doesn't like that message, right?
I love it.
Yeah. So I might call on you for some good anecdotes, because you're part of the family. Baseball Isn't Boring family. So I know that you love the game. I know that you show that not only with the work outside the podcast, but certainly inside the podcast. So
appreciate it.
Stuff.
Yeah, right when I saw you guys announce it, and I saw the the shirts circulating. I love the concept, and that's one of the biggest things that frustrates me a lot is when people sort of talk down on the game, or even the playoffs, and you just see it this season, just the energy. There's nothing like it. And but I will agree with you. That is the one thing, since working in sports, I do root for especially with those long games. I do root for the short games, and especially with me working at arena football. I went from arena football to working the Woo Sox, and I'm like, geez, this is a massive difference.
Yeah, they're going to get shorter, no question about it. And and listen, I mean, obviously, baseball can be monotonous and everything else, but one of the things doing this book was you realize. And listen, I mean, Joe's just one guy. He's a relief pitcher who is who has a good personality, but like everybody else, he just has his sort of view of things. Like he was a guy who wanted to be a skateboarder, quit baseball when he was like 10.
Wow, that's cool.
We interviewed him. He quit baseball to become a tennis player. These kids are burned out by AAU, and but the more you talk to people, whether it's actors or whether it's musicians or whoever it is, like you hear a lot of the same stories too about like what's so great about it. And there's like Joe interviews Rob Manfred for the book, and Manfred says this, and I don't argue with him. Like it's the best game to go to. Like it's the best game to go to, right? I mean, better than football, better than basketball, better than hockey, because it's basically like a social event. You can sit, you can talk, you can watch, you can boom. So yeah. Anyway,
nothing better than what's behind me. I call Fenway Heaven 2.0.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Well, keep up the good work, man. I appreciate you having me on, and anytime, and we'll keep the conversation going.
Absolutely. We hope you did enjoy part 2 of our conversation with Rob Bradford. But if you have not yet, let us know other people that you want us to interview, as well as maybe some other topics you want us to talk about over on Twitter. It's LO_Red Sox. You can also follow myself over there. It's at Jake Iggy, and also Lauren. It's 3 laws, Lauren with 4 R's. But greatly appreciate everybody making Locked On Red Sox their first listen of every single day. Now you can make your second listen Locked On MLB. MLB expert Paul Francis Sullivan brings you his unique perspective and humor to cover everything that is going on in the major leagues. Follow the #1 daily league-wide podcast, Locked On MLB, on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. But we greatly appreciate everybody tuning in. We hope everybody has a great rest of their day, and get ready for a week filled of great guests. As always, we do our best to provide the best content possible each and every single day. But we'll end this episode how we always end it. Let's go Sox.